A sponge diver named Elias Stadiatis came up from the seabed off a tiny Greek island in 1901, ripped his helmet off, and started babbling about a heap of dead bodies on the ocean floor. His crew thought the nitrogen had cooked his brain. What he'd actually found was a 2,000-year-old shipwreck. Entangled in the corroded bronze and rotting wood was a lump of green metal nobody paid much attention to at first. It sat in a museum drawer in Athens for months, while everyone fussed over the marble statues. Then the lump cracked open on its own as it dried out, and inside were gear teeth. Tiny, precise, machine gear teeth. In a Roman-era wreck. More than 1,000 years before anyone in Europe was supposed to be able to build a single gear, let alone dozens of them meshed together inside a wooden box the size of a shoebox. For over a century, the smartest people who studied it could agree on only one thing. It was a calculator. The argument was about what it calculated. And the newest scan, the one that finally read the writing hidden inside the bronze, suggests the answer was bigger than anyone wanted to admit. So what is this thing? Why does a corroded chunk of metal pulled out of the Mediterranean keep rewriting the history of technology every time someone points a better machine at it? And what did the latest scan find that the people who built our entire timeline of human invention really did not want to be true? For most of the 20th century, the story of technology was simple and comfortable. Ancient people were clever with stone and water and levers, but real machines, things with precision gearing and calculated motion, those came much later. The Greeks gave us philosophy and geometry. The Romans gave us roads and plumbing. But a working analog computer? That belonged to the 17th or 18th century at the earliest. Clockwork, astronomical instruments, calculating devices. Those were the products of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, built by men whose names we know, working in workshops in Europe with centuries of accumulated knowledge behind them. And honestly, for a long time, the Antikythera Mechanism didn't threaten that story very much, because nobody could prove what it actually did. The lump that came out of the water was a mess. Corroded into a hard mineral mass, fused, fragile, broken into dozens of pieces over the centuries it spent underwater. The first researchers could see gears in it. They could count some teeth. But the thing was so damaged that for decades the leading theory was that it was some kind of astrolabe, a navigation tool, maybe a fancy decorative clock. Important, sure, but not earth-shattering. A curiosity in a glass case. Then in 1951, a British physicist and science historian named Derek de Solla Price got hold of it and refused to let go. He spent the better part of 2 decades studying the fragments. And what he started to realize made him deeply uncomfortable, because the gear ratios he was counting didn't match a simple clock or a toy. They matched the sky. This is where the comfortable story starts to crack. Price published his findings in 1974 in a paper with a title that sounds boring and means anything but. He argued the mechanism wasn't decorative at all. It was a computer, a geared device built to predict the positions of the sun and the moon, to track the phases of the moon, to model the motion of the heavens with a level of mechanical sophistication that, by every textbook in existence, should not have appeared on Earth for another 1,400 years. Sit with that number for a second. 1,400 years. The gap between this device and the next thing remotely like it is longer than the gap between the fall of Rome and the invention of the telescope. It's as if someone dug up a laptop in a medieval castle. Before we go any further, do me a quick favor. If you like the kind of story where a single object quietly demolishes everything we thought we knew, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. It genuinely helps the channel, and it makes sure the next one of these lands in your feed. Now, here's the problem with Price's work, and it's the same problem that haunted everyone who touched this thing for 100 years. He was right about the big idea and wrong about a lot of the details, because he was essentially trying to reverse engineer a wristwatch by looking at a rusted brick. The mechanism was too corroded to read properly. He used early X-ray imaging, which helped, but it gave him flat shadows, overlapping ghosts of gears stacked behind other gears. He was guessing. Brilliant, educated guessing, but guessing. And his critics knew it. For 30 years after Price, the field basically stalled. Everyone agreed the thing was astonishing. Nobody could agree on exactly how it worked, or how many gears it had, or what all the dials were for. The mechanism kept its secrets because the technology to read it didn't exist yet. The irony writes itself. A machine too advanced for its own era, sitting in a museum, waiting for a machine advanced enough to finally understand it. That machine showed up in 2005. A team came together, academics from Cardiff and Athens and Thessaloniki, working with two companies that built imaging hardware. One of them, a firm called X-Tech, hauled an 8-ton X-ray machine to Athens specifically for this. 8 tons. They built a custom microfocus CT scanner powerful enough to see through the corroded bronze layer by layer, slicing the fragments into thousands of digital cross-sections without touching them. The other company, Hewlett-Packard, brought a technique that mapped the surface of the fragments under light from dozens of angles, pulling out faint engraving that the naked eye could never catch. And what they found rewrote the device from the inside out. The CT scans revealed gears nobody had ever seen, hidden behind other gears, buried in the corroded mass. They could finally count teeth precisely. Not estimate. Count. And the count mattered, because in a gear, the number of teeth is the math. A gear with 127 teeth isn't decorative. It's a specific calculation, encoded in metal. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. One of the gear trains modeled the motion of the moon. Not just where the moon is, but how fast it appears to move, which changes across its orbit because the moon's path around Earth is an ellipse, not a circle. The ancient builder solved that. He used 2 gears mounted slightly off-center, one with a little pin riding in a slot on the other, so that as they turned, the output sped up and slowed down to match the moon's actual wobble across the sky. It's a mechanical trick that wouldn't be formally described in astronomy for another 17 centuries, sitting there in a box from the 1st century BC, working perfectly. Whoever built this didn't just know the sky. They knew how to turn knowledge of the sky into moving metal. That's a different and much rarer kind of genius. The scans kept giving. The team read inscriptions hidden inside the fragments, text that had been invisible since the thing sank. Thousands of characters of tiny Greek lettering, a sort of instruction manual engraved on the device itself. And the inscriptions described dials. A front dial showing the zodiac and the calendar and the position of the sun and moon. A back dial that tracked something far more ambitious. The back of the mechanism, it turned out, was a pair of spiral dials. One of them followed a 19-year cycle the Greeks used to reconcile the lunar months with the solar year. The other followed a 223-month cycle called the Saros. And this is the one that should make the hair on your arms stand up, because the Saros cycle predicts eclipses. The device wasn't just telling you where the moon was tonight. It was telling you when the sky was going to go dark years in advance. The little dial even carried inscriptions noting the predicted color and characteristics of each eclipse. Think about what that means for the person holding this thing 2,000 years ago. You turn a crank. The dials move. And the machine tells you that on a date years from now, the sun will be swallowed in the middle of the afternoon. In a world where an eclipse could end a battle or topple a king, that wasn't a toy. That was power you could hold in your hands. And there was a smaller dial, almost an afterthought tucked into the design, that finally settled an old argument and opened a new one. It tracked the 4-year cycle of the ancient Greek games. Olympia, Nemea, the Isthmian Games, the games at Dodona. Why would an astronomical computer keep track of athletic festivals? Because to the Greeks, these weren't separate things. The calendar, the heavens, the festivals, the gods, it was all one connected system, and this machine modeled the whole of it. Now stop and think about what we've actually established here, because the implications keep getting worse for the tidy version of history. This is not a prototype. You don't get gearing this refined on the first try. A device this sophisticated, with this many interlocking systems, with the lunar anomaly worked out in metal, with eclipse prediction running on a spiral dial, that is not the work of a lone genius having one good afternoon. That is the product of a tradition. Somebody taught somebody. There were earlier versions, simpler ones, that we have never found and probably never will, because bronze gets melted down and reused and seawater eats it. What survived is one example from what had to be a lineage of these things stretching back generations. Which raises a question that genuinely keeps historians up at night. If they could build this in the 1st century BC, what happened? Why does the trail go cold? Why does nothing remotely this advanced show up again in the archaeological record for over 1,000 years? The honest answer is we don't fully know, and anyone who tells you they're certain is selling something. The most likely explanation is grim and simple. Knowledge like this lived in a handful of workshops, passed mouth to ear, written on materials that rotted. When the workshops closed, when the craftsmen died without students, when the libraries burned, the knowledge didn't get backed up anywhere. It just stopped. The capability evaporated, and the world forgot it had ever existed. We only know about it now because one ship sank in exactly the wrong place at exactly the right time, and the sea preserved what dry land would have destroyed. That's the part that should bother you. Not that the mechanism is amazing, that it's almost certainly not unique, and everything like it is gone. So who built it? Here the evidence gets thin and the speculation gets thick. Some researchers point toward the island of Rhodes, which had a famous school of astronomy and was home to a thinker named Posidonius who reportedly built models of the heavens. Others note connections to the city of Corinth and the colonies linked to it, partly because of the festival names on that little dial. There's a tempting thread that runs back toward Archimedes, who according to ancient writers built devices that modeled the motion of the sun and moon and planets, devices that were carried off to Rome as treasures after his death. Archimedes died in 212 BC, likely too early to have built this specific machine, but if the Romans were hauling Greek star machines around as plunder, then the tradition the Antikythera Mechanism belongs to was real, and it was known, and it was valued. We just lost almost all of it. The shipwreck itself fits that picture. The Antikythera wreck was a cargo ship, probably heading toward Rome, loaded with Greek luxury goods. Bronze and marble statues, glassware, jewelry, fine pottery. Plunder or trade goods, or both. The spoils of a Greek world being absorbed by a Roman one. The mechanism was riding along with the statues, just another precious object being shipped west. Nobody on that boat thought of it as the most important thing on board. The most important thing on board, as far as history is concerned, almost didn't survive, and the statues everyone was fussing over are now footnotes next to it. And here is where the most recent work comes back in, because the scanning never really stopped, and the newest analysis points at something even more provocative than eclipse prediction. For a long time, researchers assumed the front of the mechanism showed the sun and moon and maybe a few other markers. But the inscriptions recovered from the deep scans keep mentioning the planets. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. 5 planets named, with what appear to be references to their positions and their cycles. The problem is that the surviving gears don't obviously account for all that planetary motion. So either there were more gears we've lost, or the front of the device was far more crowded and ambitious than what physically survived. In recent years, a team at University College London used the recovered inscriptions, the precise tooth counts, and ancient Greek mathematical methods to build a complete computer model of how the front of the mechanism most likely worked. Their reconstruction proposes a full display of the cosmos as the ancient Greeks understood it. Earth at the center, then the moon, the sun, and all 5 known planets, each riding its own ring, each driven to show not just where it sat among the stars, but the strange looping motion the planets appear to make when you watch them across months. Every body in the visible heavens, modeled in bronze, turning from a single crank. If that reconstruction is right, and there's still real debate about the details, then the Antikythera Mechanism wasn't a calculator with a side hobby. It was a complete mechanical model of the known universe. A planetarium you could fit on a table. Something that, by every assumption we hold about ancient capability, has no business existing. And get this, the same modeling effort ran into a wall that tells you how far ahead this thing really was. To reproduce the planetary motion the inscriptions describe, you need gear trained so intricate that the modern researchers, with computers and CAD software and 2,000 extra years of mathematics, had to work hard to figure out how the original builder could have done it with hand tools. They eventually proposed a workable scheme. But the fact that it strained 21st century specialists to reverse engineer is the whole point. The gap between what this object is and what its era was supposed to be capable of isn't a gap. It's a chasm. So let's go back to that first question, the one underneath all of this. Why does a corroded chunk of metal keep rewriting our timeline? Because every time we build a better tool to look at it, the mechanism turns out to be more advanced than we last thought. Price thought it was a sun and moon computer. The CT scans showed eclipse prediction. The inscriptions showed the planets. The newest reconstructions show the entire cosmos. The trend line only ever points one direction. We keep raising our estimate of what these people could do, and we have never once had to lower it. That should change how you think about the ancient world. Not as a primitive place slowly fumbling toward technology, but as a place that, in at least one workshop, in at least one lineage of craftsmen, had reached a level of precision engineering that then vanished so completely we assumed it had never happened. The Dark Ages weren't just a loss of territory or population. Somewhere in there, we lost the ability to build a machine that a Greek artisan made by hand before Julius Caesar was born. There's a quiet horror in that if you let yourself feel it. Progress isn't a guarantee. Knowledge isn't permanent. A civilization can climb to a height, lose its footing, and forget it was ever up there. We found the Antikythera Mechanism by accident, sitting at the bottom of the sea, the single surviving witness to a capability the world threw away. How many other heights did we reach and lose with no shipwreck lucky enough to preserve the evidence? The mechanism is in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens now, the fragments displayed behind glass alongside modern reconstructions that finally let you see what the bronze once did. People walk past it every day. Most of them have no idea they're looking at the thing that broke history, the object that proves the line from primitive to advanced was never as straight as the textbooks drew it. It just sits there, green and broken and impossibly old, keeping the rest of its secrets, waiting, the way it waited 100 years for a machine smart enough to read it. And maybe that's the part that stays with you. We probably still haven't read all of it. There are fragments too damaged, even for the best scanners, inscriptions half-eaten by the sea, gears that may have existed and dissolved. The next jump in imaging technology might pull something new out of that bronze, and if the pattern holds, whatever it finds will be more astonishing than what we know today. The mechanism has surprised every generation that studied it. There's no reason to think ours is the last. So what do you think? Was this a one-off act of genius that history swallowed by accident, or the last surviving piece of a whole lost tradition of ancient engineering we'll never fully recover? And if a civilization 2,000 years ago could build a computer and then forget how, what does that say about the permanence of everything we've built? Drop your honest take in the comments. I read them, and the best debates on this channel always come from you. If you made it this far, hit that like button so more people find this breakdown, and subscribe if you haven't already. There's a lot more coming on the objects and discoveries that quietly rewrite what we thought we knew, and you don't want to miss what's next.